The Scratcher by Caroline Corfield. The stunted hawthorn thrashed in the strengthening wind. Each gust pulled through them like a comb in tangled hair. Tiny fingered leaves raced away from the twiggy branches. To the uninitiated, it was a typical autumn evening on the coast, but Freddie Winters knew there was something more in the weather. Freddie was short, a stocky man, dark, even while his hair had turned to pepper and salt. His deep brown eyes sat in his olive skin like exposed pools on the marsh, peaty with hidden depths. His ancestors had lived along this shore forever, living their lives as he lived his, harvesting from the land and the sand, storing their knowledge like treasure. He knew the safe paths on the muddy sandbanks and through the marsh, knew the secret names of the becks that drained the heath, and he had the magic of his ancestors too. Intuition, intellect, and his senses combined with something extra to allow him to tap into the surrounding forces of nature. Cities would have neutered him, but in his element he had real power. Is it enough for what lies ahead? Only 2 nights ago he'd been out and saw them. The lights on the foreshore that bobbed and weaved, the spirits of the drowned had been dancing on Low Seaton Beach, and he knew a storm was coming. A low pressure created from more than just the Earth's atmospheric patterns. He cursed under his breath, tucking the words into his chest so the wind wouldn't carry them away. It won't do to have such a wind hold to my curses. Belle's usually such a well-behaved dog. He didn't believe the dog's disappearance and the storm were coincidence. In his long experience, there was very little you could put down to that. Things were connected, and he worried about what the dog, the storm, and himself had in common now. The noise of the wind increased in volume, rushing in his ears over the crashing of the waves below the narrow line of dunes. The hawthorns held tenaciously to the loose sand at the dune's crown, surrounded by the daggered gorse to the lee and the sharp marram grass seaward, dunes with teeth and claws. He tried to recall the landscape as it had been when he'd picked the fat blackberries in the long, low golden sun a week ago. It flashed briefly in his mind, but was ripped away as a sprig of hawthorn branch whipped his face, leaving a burning imprint. His memory magic was no match for the anger of the storm. Who's stirred the lord of the under the sea to this extreme? His progress along the top of the dunes was slow, more a forward stumble than anything else. There was no point in calling Belle's name. I'll have to hope I spot her, probably cowering in undergrowth. It felt futile. A feeling up his spine told him the dog wasn't here, and his decision to look for her was not the reason he was out. Suddenly all noise stopped. The hawthorns froze in mid-frenzy. He nearly fell as the resistance of the wind ceased. Only one sound remained, a horrible scratching, like an insect trying to escape a box. Then the scene restarted and he was blown backwards into a large gorse bush. The urgency to find Belle was gone. Clearly he'd experienced what he was expected to. Crawling out from the bush, his face and hands scratched and bleeding, stinging in the spray-laden winds, he knew Belle would be at home, and he needed to be too. The wind howled in the chimney. The flames of the fire guttered low, then stretched up with renewed vigour as they felt the draw of the wind catch them. With frozen hands, he held the newspaper against the hearth. Out of focus, he gazed as the typeface squirmed in the firelight. He never read the papers. Picking them up for fire duties and the occasional crossword, he relied on his senses telling him about happenings in the world. A few minutes later, withdrawing the paper sheet and twisting it into a poor facsimile of its ancestor branch, he threw it on the burgeoning fire. Belle looked up from the floor. He could see she felt the same. Something dreadful was going to occur tonight. Tired from his battle to get home, there was no energy left to go through the ritual necessary to find out. It won't be worth the effort anyway. There's nothing that can change what's unfolding. The storm had grown sentient. It had grown purpose. It sought revenge for the Lord of Under the Sea. tore at the dunes, clawing them down to the foaming sea edge. Soon the scratcher would break, run amok in the harbour and the little town. Hoping he was safe, that his hastily made warding spells worked, he recalled his panicked motions, carving the air with his cold, crooked fingers, before anything else, drawing his home into the ground, camouflaged in the dun of the heath. He'd nodded off. It was Belle's wet muzzle stinging his scored hands which had woken him. He couldn't place what had changed. Then, no sound again. He had no breath, but magic allowed him awareness outside of time to hear the scratcher. Receding, not out to sea but inland, dragging the storm noise behind it, washing over him, pushing him back into the chair he'd half pushed out of. That's bad. It's not going to be over tomorrow. Finally understanding why he'd been compelled to the dunes earlier, my help was demanded. After all the times he had called upon the spirits of the coast, it was time to pay it back. A single crack of thunder broke the storm's back. The wind's howl softened. A low, insistent moan lulled him to sleep in the armchair. He woke in the damp cold. A weak wash of light came through the eastern window, casting a ghostly shadow of the chair against the peeling paintwork on the facing wall. Belle started to her feet, her long hound body stretched out, brushing the flagstones, picking up ash. He leant forward and dusted it off. Come on, girl, let's go survey the damage. The door was on the west side, facing into the land. As he stepped into the dawn, he was reminded of standing in the space without time. Little sign of the storm was immediately in sight, but it would be worse as he moved round to the east. He looked up to see the sun's pale disk become obscured by a heavy grey cumulus late to the storm, emptying its rain almost apologetically. Everything gleamed in the wet. Hawthorn branches, ruched sand, and thick leathery kelp littered the eastern side. Further away he could see gaps in the dunes. The sea eyed him back. Belle ran off to investigate the seaweed, reassuring him the chaos was normal. You never know what the sea can rip up and throw on shore in such a storm. Looks like the scratcher is all that escaped. Bad enough. Picking up branches, snapping them into equal lengths, he inhaled deeply. The flinty sand and the drying kelp stirred his soul. Paying homage for the bounty, he mouthed the words of an ancient prayer as his arms grew full of new kindling. He whistled for Belle and they returned to the house. He stacked the new branches by the hearth, took some older ones over to rekindle the fire and made his breakfast. When he finally reached the edge of the harbour town, the disorder of plants and sand no longer troubled him. It was the enormous structure thrown against the pier wall that quickened his heart instead. The oil rig sat there puncturing his reality. The heavy sandstone blocks had crumpled around one of its legs as if made of cardboard. It loomed towards the harbour master's building like a yellow insect, ready to devour the old slate. "Freddie!" a voice called him back from his vision. Focusing, he recognised Carl, the harbour master. They shared an affinity for the sea and the shore. Shared blood too, even if Carl didn't know it. "Carl, what's all this then?" "Came adrift last night, floating an exploration rig. Took out a fishing boat from down the coast. Lifeboat went out, but they didn't find anyone." Freddie mirrored Carol's sadness. A waste of life over the want of money. Anger bubbled, a beachside spring, not always visible but always flowing. Carl nodded, the same brown eyes sympathetic to his frown. "Company aren't answering the phone. I can start an investigation, but I can't move the rig without them." "Oh yes." He sucked the air over his teeth. "That's bad. Lots of things where they shouldn't be." "Tell me about it," agreed Carl. Electricity was not Freddie's forte, but he could bend it, most notably in his youth, resulting in a ban from the local amusement arcade. "A telephone line simply carries electrical signal. Perhaps I can nudge this monster gone." Carol's office is neither shore nor sea, yet has authority over both. Could it be that easy? I'm parched after walking. Any chance of a cuppa? He played the older gent card, knowing Carol's weak spot was the ingrained hospitality taught to him by his formidable mother, Freddie's second cousin. Where are my manners? Come on. In the cramped office, rich with the smell of damp paper and salt air, he waited for the kettle to boil. I've only got the crap stuff, said Carol, a smile making up for the admission. Musing that not all of his cousin's lessons had survived Carol's time in the Navy, he accepted the dark liquid masquerading as tea. It smelled almost right, like the oil rig, askew to his expectations. What else is Sideways on now? The phone rang, a shrill bell that also sounded outside the building. Carol picked up the receiver quickly. Seaton Harbour, how can I help? Freddie heard the change to officialdom in Carol's voice. People have so many sides to them. I'm surprised we can keep track of who we really are. A shuffle of cards and I'm the old gadger, or the scary witch man, the friendly shore guide, or... He felt the electricity in the line, sensed in Carol's change of stance that the rig company was returning the call. Now's my chance. He pulled himself up straight. Carol noticed and turned. Freddie put his hand out for the receiver and Carol handed it over, awe-stricken face meeting the taller, younger Freddie standing in front of him. To whom am I speaking? Freddie's voice bore down the line, enunciated clear, laden with the power of tone and words and that elusive something else. This is Jeremy Sanderson, CEO of Reliance Oil. Who are you? Freddie sensed the dynamic between them flex. Like the oil rig to the harbour wall, he was about to curve into Jeremy Sanderson. This is Frederick Winters, 5th Earl of Ostern. I want your rig removed today. The wall made safe today. Repaired by the end of the week. Do I make myself clear? Smelling hot metal, acrid plastic, too busy concentrating to find out why he ignored it. The voice of Jeremy Sanderson was strangely distorted. Right away, I'll have a team there within an hour, sir. Exhausted by his efforts, he held out the receiver to Carol. Shrinking back down, aging some more, fresh wrinkles creased his face. Carol wasn't taking the phone. He looked down and discovered the melted, stringy remains of the plastic wires exposed. Oh dear, never mind. Freddie, gulped Carol. You're never an earl. What's he going to do when he finds out? Carol, Freddie smiled at his distant relation. How do you know what I am?